What happens when a music legend walks onto a daytime talk show expecting a friendly chat, and instead gets ambushed by a host with an agenda? In just 38 seconds, one careless comment from Denise Welch would ignite a firestorm that turned a simple interview into one of the most shocking exits in British television history. Rod Stewart walked onto the Loose Women set that afternoon with his trademark confidence, flashing that famous smile to the studio audience. The applause was thunderous. This was supposed to be easy, promotional, fun. He settled into the bright purple chair, adjusting his jacket as the four panelists smiled back at him. Denise Welch sat front and center, flanked by Carol McGiffin, Janet Street Porter, and Sherry Hewson. The interview started innocently enough. Denise leaned forward with that practiced television warmth and said, "Rod, lovely to have you here. Let's talk about your new album." Rod nodded, clearly ready to discuss his music. "Thanks for having me. Yeah, the album's something I'm really proud of. We went back to basics with this one. Real instruments, real feeling." But Denise had other plans. Before Rod could elaborate, she cut him off. "Before we get to that, I think we need to address something. Your personal life has been, shall we say, colorful over the years." The smile on Rod's face faltered slightly. "Well, I suppose that's one way to put it." Carol McGiffin jumped in, sensing the shift in energy. "Come on, Denise, let the man talk about his music." Denise waved her hand dismissively at Carol. No, I think the audience wants to know. Rod, you've been married 3 times. You have 8 children with 5 different women. Don't you think that's a bit irresponsible?" The audience went quiet. You could feel the temperature in the studio drop 10 degrees. Rod's posture stiffened. "I'm sorry, what?" Denise pressed on, seemingly energized by the confrontation. "I mean, it's not exactly setting a good example, is it? Running around, having children all over the place." Janet Street Porter tried to intervene. "Denise, that's a bit harsh." But Denise was on a roll now. "Is it though? I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. These celebrities think they can just do whatever they want without consequences." Rod's jaw tightened. He leaned forward in his chair. His voice measured but firm. "Hold on a minute. First of all, I love all my children. Every single one of them. I'm involved in their lives, I support them, and I'm proud to be their father." Denise laughed, actually laughed. "Oh, please. You can't possibly be a proper father to 8 kids scattered across different mothers." Sherry Hewson looked genuinely uncomfortable, shifting in her seat. "Maybe we should move on to the album." Rod held up his hand. "No, let's not move on. I want to address this. Denise, you don't know anything about my family. You don't know how I parent. You don't know the relationships I have with my children or their mothers. What gives you the right to sit here and judge me?" The audience started murmuring. Some people were nodding in agreement with Rod. Others looked shocked at the confrontation unfolding before them. Denise leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "I have every right. This is my show, Saftori, and I ask the questions I think are important. The public has a right to know what kind of person you really are." Carol McGiffin interjected again, more forcefully this time. "Your show? It's called Loose Women. Denise, not the Denise Welch Hour." Denise shot Carol a look that could freeze water. "Stay out of this, Carol." Rod shook his head slowly. "You know what? This is unbelievable. I came here to talk about music, to have a nice conversation, and you've turned it into some kind of character assassination." Denise's eyes lit up with what looked like triumph. "Character assassination? I'm just asking questions about your very public life choices. If you can't handle a few tough questions, maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews." Janet Street Porter spoke up again. "Denise, you're being unreasonable. Rod's private life is his own business." Denise spun on Janet. "Oh, so now everyone's ganging up on me? Typical. I try to have a real conversation instead of the usual softball celebrity worship. And I'm the bad guy." Rod stood up from his chair. The studio fell completely silent. You want to know what I think? I think you invited me here with no intention of having a real conversation. You wanted drama. You wanted conflict. Well, congratulations. You got it. Denise stood up too, pointing her finger at Rod. Sit down. We're not finished here. The entitlement in her voice was palpable. Or the way she said it. Like she owned him. Like he was obligated to sit there and take her abuse. Rod's face turned red. Actually, we are finished. I don't have to sit here and listen to you insult me and my family on national television. Sherry tried to calm things down. Please, both of you, let's just take a breath. But it was too late. The dam had broken. Denise took a step closer to Rod, her voice rising. You're going to walk out? How childish. How typical of someone who's never had to face real accountability. Rod's voice was ice cold now. Accountability? From you? A woman who's built her career on gossiping about other people's lives? That's rich. Carol stood up, positioning herself between them. Okay, this has gone far enough. Denise, apologize. Denise whipped around to face Carol. Apologize? For what? For doing my job? For asking the questions that need to be asked? Janet chimed in. Your job isn't to bully guests, Denise. This is embarrassing. The audience was completely absorbed now. Some people had their hands over their mouths in shock. Others were leaning forward, not wanting to miss a second of this train wreck. Rod started removing his microphone. I've been in this business for 50 years. I've done thousands of interviews. I've been asked tough questions before, and I've never walked out. But this isn't journalism. This isn't even entertainment. This is just you getting off on being cruel. Denise's face flushed. How dare you? How dare you come on this show and disrespect me like this? The irony of her statement hung in the air like thick smoke. She was the one who had started this entire confrontation, and now she was playing the victim. Sherry made one last attempt. Rod, please stay. We can talk about your music. That's what you came here for. Rod looked at Sherry, and his expression softened slightly. I appreciate that, Sherry. I really do. But I can't stay here and pretend this is okay. It's not okay to treat people like this. Denise threw her hands up in exasperation. Oh, here we go. The martyr routine. Poor little Rod Stewart. Can't handle a strong woman asking him real questions. That was it. That was the line that sealed it. Rod's eyes went wide with genuine disbelief. A strong woman? Is that what you think this is? Strength? Tearing someone down on television isn't strength, Denise. It's cowardice. Real strength would be having an actual conversation, showing some empathy, treating your guests with basic human decency. Janet started clapping slowly. Well said. Denise turned on Janet. Oh, shut up, Janet. The audience gasped. You don't tell Janet Street Porter to shut up on live television. Carol looked at Denise like she'd lost her mind. Rod finished removing his microphone and placed it carefully on his chair. I'm done here, and for the record, my children are the best thing that ever happened to me. All 8 of them. I wouldn't change a single thing about my family. Maybe if you spent less time judging other people's lives, you'd be happier with your own. The silence that followed was deafening. Rod had just delivered the kind of knockout blow that would be replayed on television for years to come. Denise's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. For once, she had no comeback. Carol spoke quietly. Rod, I'm sorry this happened. You didn't deserve this. Rod nodded at her. Thanks, Carol. You ladies have a good show. Well, most of you do. As Rod turned to walk off the set, Denise found her voice again. Fine. Walk out. Run away like you always do. That's what you're good at, isn't it? Running away from responsibility? Rod stopped in his tracks, and the entire studio held its breath. He turned slowly, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet but firm. You don't know me. You don't know my life. You don't know my family. And after today, you never will. Good luck with your show, Denise. Something tells me you're going to need it." Sherry was visibly upset now, close to tears. "This is horrible. This is just horrible." Janet put her arm around Sherry. "It's okay. This isn't your fault." But Denise wasn't finished. Even as Rod walked toward the exit, she kept going. "That's right. Run away. Run back to your mansion and your fancy cars. You can't handle the truth," Carol finally snapped. "Denise, stop it. Just stop." The audience started applauding. Not for Denise. For Rod. The applause grew louder and louder as he made his way through the studio. People were standing up, clapping, showing their support for a man who had been ambushed and had stood up for himself with dignity and grace. Denise looked around, finally realizing that the room had turned against her. "What? What did I do? I was just asking questions." Janet shook her head. "No, Denise, you weren't asking questions. You were attacking him. There's a difference." The cameras kept rolling, capturing every second of the fallout. Denise's face cycled through emotions. Anger, confusion, defiance, and finally something that might have been the beginning of awareness. Carol sat back down heavily. "I can't believe that just happened." Sherry wiped her eyes. He seemed like such a nice man. He was so excited to talk about his music. Janet looked directly at Denise. "You ruined it. You had one of the biggest music legends of all time sitting right there, and you ruined it because you couldn't help yourself." Denise's defenses went back up. "I didn't ruin anything. He's the one who stormed off like a child." The audience erupted in boos. Actual boos. Denise looked shocked, like she couldn't believe people were booing her. Her, the host. How dare they? Carol stood up again. "You know what? I think we need to take a break. Everyone just needs to calm down." But the damage was done. Rod Stewart was gone. The audience was in an uproar, and the Loose Women panel was divided down the middle. Denise on one side, still convinced she'd done nothing wrong. Carol, Janet, and Sherry on the other, looking like they wanted to be anywhere else in the world. A producer rushed onto the set, whispering urgently in Denise's ear. She waved him away. "I'm fine. We're fine. We'll be back after the break." But they weren't fine. Nothing about this was fine. What should have been a pleasant 10-minute chat about Rod Stewart's new album had devolved into one of the most uncomfortable moments in talk show history. As the cameras cut for the commercial break, you could see Denise finally starting to grasp the magnitude of what had just happened. Her hands were shaking slightly. She sat down hard in her chair. Carol leaned over to her. "Are you happy now? Is this what you wanted?" Denise didn't answer. For the first time since Rod had walked in, she seemed at a loss for words. Janet gathered her notes. "I've been doing television for 30 years, and I've never seen anything like that." Sherry was still crying softly. He was just here to talk about his music. That's all he wanted. Just to talk about his music. The audience was buzzing, everyone talking at once, sharing their shock and disbelief. Some people were already on their phones, no doubt texting friends about what they'd just witnessed live. Backstage, Rod Stewart was being escorted out by security, not because he was a threat, but because the producers didn't want any more confrontation. He looked tired, frustrated, but also strangely relieved, like a weight had been lifted. And he'd stood up for himself and his family, and he'd done it with class. Meanwhile, back on set, Denise was trying to compose herself for the return from commercial. But you could see the cracks forming, the realization that maybe, just maybe, she'd gone too far, that maybe her idea of tough journalism had crossed a line into something else entirely. Carol wasn't letting it go. "You owe him an apology, a public apology." Denise's eyes flashed. I'm not apologizing for doing my job." Janet laughed bitterly. Your job? Your job is to make guests feel welcome, to have interesting conversations, to entertain the audience. You didn't do any of that. You bullied a man about his family on live television." Sherry added quietly. And now he's gone, and we still have 20 minutes of show left. The producer came back, more insistent this time. They needed to figure out how to salvage the rest of the show. But how do you come back from something like that? How do you pretend everything's fine when you've just publicly humiliated one of rock and roll's biggest legends? Denise stood up, pacing now. He was too sensitive. If he can't handle a few questions about his personal life, he shouldn't be famous. Carol's voice was sharp. Stop it. Just stop. You're making it worse. The audience could hear some of this, and the murmuring grew louder. People were not happy with Denise. So you could feel the shift in the room, the way public opinion had turned decisively against her. Janet checked her watch. We're back on in 1 minute. Denise took a deep breath, smoothing down her outfit. Fine, we'll address it when we come back. I'll explain what happened. Carol shot her a warning look. If you blame him for this, I'm walking off too. Denise opened her mouth to respond, but the floor manager started counting down. 5, 4, 3, 2. The cameras were rolling again. Denise forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Welcome back. As you all saw, we had a bit of a situation with Rod Stewart. Now, I want to explain. But before she could continue, the audience started booing again. Louder this time. More unified. The message was clear. They weren't buying whatever spin she was about to put on this. Denise looked genuinely rattled now. Please, if you'll just let me explain. Someone from the audience shouted, "You were out of line!" Another voice, "Leave the man alone!" A third, "Apologize!" The studio was descending into chaos. The producers were frantically trying to decide whether to cut to commercial again or just let it play out. This was live television at its most raw and unpredictable. Carol took control. Everyone, please, let's all just calm down. What happened with Rod was unfortunate. We had hoped for a lovely interview about his music, and it went in a different direction. Denise cut in. A different direction because he couldn't handle honest questions. The boos erupted again. Janet actually put her head in her hands. Sherry found some courage. Denise, please, just admit you went too far. That's all anyone wants to hear. But Denise's pride wouldn't let her. I went too far. I asked legitimate questions about his very public life. If he's lived his life a certain way, he should be prepared to discuss it. Carol stood up. That's it. I'm done. I'm not sitting here while you continue to justify what you did. Rod Stewart is a gentleman who came here in good faith, and you ambushed him. I'm ashamed to be associated with this. And just like that, Carol walked off the set too. The audience went wild, applauding her exit just like they'd applauded Rod's. Now it was just Denise, Janet, and Sherry. Janet looked at Denise with something like pity. You still don't get it, do you? Denise's voice cracked slightly. Get what? Janet leaned forward. This isn't about tough questions or holding celebrities accountable. This is about basic respect. You treated that man like garbage, and now everyone knows it. Your reputation, this show's reputation, it's all damaged because you couldn't control yourself for one interview. Sherry nodded in agreement. She's right, Denise. You need to own this. But Denise was too far gone. Bantu dug into her position. I own nothing. I did what I thought was right, and if people can't handle that, then that's their problem. The producer was making frantic cutting motions, trying to get them to go to commercial, but Denise ignored him. She was in full meltdown mode now, all pretense of professionalism abandoned. Janet started gathering her things. Well, I'm not going to sit here and be part of this disaster. Sherry, are you coming? Sherry looked torn, but ultimately nodded. I'm sorry, Denise, but yes, I'm coming. And then they were gone too. Denise Welch sat alone at the Loose Women desk, the cameras still rolling, the audience silent now in sheer disbelief at what they were witnessing. One by one, everyone had walked out on her. She looked into the camera, her face pale. Well, I suppose that's the show for today. But it wasn't just the show that was over. In the span of less than 30 minutes, Denise Welch had managed to alienate a legendary guest, turn the audience against her, and drive her own co-hosts off the set. All because she couldn't resist the urge to tear someone down instead of building them up. The final image before they cut to commercial was Denise sitting alone at that desk, surrounded by empty purple chairs, the physical manifestation of the isolation she'd created for herself. The studio audience sat in stunned silence, processing what they'd just witnessed. This wasn't television as usual. This was a masterclass in how quickly things can spiral out of control when ego overtakes empathy, when the desire for drama supersedes basic human decency. Rod Stewart had walked onto that set as a guest. He'd left as a hero who stood up for himself and his family. And Denise Welch? She'd walked into the show as a host and walked out as a cautionary tale about the price of cruelty disguised as honesty. The purple chairs sat empty, a stark reminder that sometimes, when you push too hard, everyone pushes back. And when they do, you might find yourself sitting alone, wondering how it all went so wrong, so fast. But deep down, in that moment of solitude, maybe, just maybe, Denise knew exactly how it had happened. She'd chosen confrontation over conversation. She'd chosen judgment over understanding. She'd chosen to make someone feel small instead of making them feel welcome. And in the end, that choice had cost her everything. The cameras finally cut away, but the damage was done. The story was already spreading, already becoming the thing everyone would talk about. Not Rod Stewart's new album, not his music, not his incredible career. Just this. This moment. This confrontation. This spectacular implosion of what should have been simple and pleasant. As the studio lights dimmed and the audience filed out, still buzzing with shock and excitement, the one thing was crystal clear. Rod Stewart had come to Loose Women to promote his music and ended up defending his dignity. And he'd done it with more grace and composure than anyone could have expected. He hadn't screamed. He hadn't sworn. He hadn't stooped to Denise's level. He'd simply stated his truth, stood his ground, and walked away when it became clear that staying would mean compromising his self-respect. That's what made him the hero of this story. Not because he was famous. Not because he was rich. Not because he was Rod Stewart. But because when faced with someone determined to tear him down, he refused to be torn. He remained who he was, defended what mattered to him, and left with his head held high. Meanwhile, Denise remained at that desk for a few moments longer after the cameras stopped rolling, the weight of what had happened finally settling on her shoulders like a heavy coat. The other chairs were still empty. Her co-hosts were gone. The guest was gone. The audience's goodwill was gone. Everything was gone except the reality of her choices and their consequences. A production assistant approached tentatively. "Denise, we need to clear the set." She nodded slowly, standing up on shaky legs. The studio that had been so full of energy and life just an hour ago now felt hollow and cold. Her footsteps echoed as she walked across the stage, past the empty chairs, toward the exit. This was supposed to be her moment to shine, and to show she could ask the tough questions, to prove she was more than just another daytime television host. Instead, it had become her worst nightmare, broadcast live for everyone to see. The tough questions had revealed more about her than they ever had about Rod Stewart. They'd shown her need to dominate, her inability to show grace, her willingness to hurt someone for the sake of a moment. Rod Stewart was probably already halfway home by now, calling his kids, telling them what happened, maybe even laughing about it with his family, because that's what people with solid foundations do. They weather the storms and find their way back to what matters. His children, The very thing Denise had weaponized against him were his source of strength. Her attacks had bounced off that strength like rain off stone. The irony wasn't lost on anyone who'd watched the confrontation unfold. Denise had tried to shame Rod for his family, for his choices, for his life. But in doing so, she'd only revealed her own emptiness. While he had 8 children who loved him, multiple relationships built on mutual respect and co-parenting, a legacy of music and family that would outlive any television show, what did she have? Empty chairs and a studio audience that had turned against her. The makeup room was quiet when she arrived. Usually it was bustling, full of chatter and laughter between segments. Now it was just her and her reflection in the mirror, in staring back at her with mascara slightly smudged and lips pressed into a thin line. She looked tired, defeated, small. Someone knocked on the door. "Denise, the executive producer wants to see you." Of course he did. Of course there would be meetings and discussions and probably consequences. You don't lose a guest, 3 co-hosts, and an entire audience in one episode without repercussions. But even knowing that, even facing whatever was coming, she couldn't bring herself to feel regret for the right reasons. She was upset about the outcome, not the actions. She was sorry she'd been caught, not sorry for what she'd done. That was the real tragedy of it all. Rod Stewart had walked off that set, having learned nothing new about himself. His convictions confirmed, his character proven. Denise Welch walked off having learned nothing either, her worst impulses justified in her own mind, her ego bruised but unbroken. The difference was, one of them would go home to love and support, surrounded by people who valued him. The other would go home to replay the day over and over, wondering why everyone else was wrong. The story would live on long after this day ended. It would be clipped and shared and discussed and analyzed. People would take sides. Think pieces would be written. But the truth, the simple truth that everyone who'd watched could see, was this. Rod Stewart had been a guest who deserved respect and didn't receive it. But Denise Welch had been a host who owed respect and refused to give it. And when those two forces collided, there could only ever be one outcome. The empty purple chairs would be filled again tomorrow, probably with different panelists, definitely with a different energy. The show would go on, because shows always go on. But something had broken here that couldn't be easily fixed. Trust, goodwill, the basic social contract between host and guest that made these shows possible. Rod Stewart didn't need loose women. He never had. His legacy was secure, his talent undeniable, his life full regardless of what any talk show host thought about it. But loose women had needed Rod Stewart, needed his star power, needed his audience, needed the legitimacy that comes from landing a guest of his caliber. And in the space of one interview, in the span of a few heated exchanges, that need had been transformed into a liability. The executive producer's office loomed ahead. Denise took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and walked in ready to defend herself, ready to explain, ready to fight. Because that's all she knew how to do. Fight, attack, confront. Never concede, never apologize, never admit that maybe, just maybe, she'd been wrong. But as she sat down across from the producer, as she saw the disappointment in his eyes, a tiny crack appeared in her armor. Just for a second. Just long enough for a whisper of doubt to creep in. What if they were all right? What if she had gone too far? What if her idea of strength was actually just cruelty dressed up in different clothes? The producer opened his mouth to speak, and Denise braced herself for whatever was coming. Because this was it. This was the reckoning. Not just for today, but for every other time she'd pushed too hard, gone too far, prioritized drama over decency. It all came down to this moment, in this office, after that interview. Rod Stewart was somewhere else entirely now. Improbably on the phone with his manager, probably shaking his head at the whole mess. But he was okay. He'd be okay because he'd stood up for himself when it mattered. He'd drawn a line and refused to let it be crossed. He'd chosen his dignity over a television appearance, and in doing so, he'd won something far more valuable than good publicity. He'd won his self-respect, and no amount of album promotion was worth losing that.